Let's talk about what Joe Burrow needs to do to help the Cincinnati Bengals avoid the slow start narrative in 2025.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Jake Liscow. He's James Rapien, and we've been hosting the Locked On Bengals podcast collectively since 2016. So if you're looking for the best place for daily news and analysis on your Cincinnati Bengals as training camp is ramping up, and you want to know what to expect from the Bengals this season, you're in the right place. Everydayers out there, of course, already know that, but if you're not an everydayer yet, you can just hit that subscribe button on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts, and that makes it really easy to find this podcast every day. Don't miss an episode, and if you want to take it a step further, you can make Locked On Bengals your first listen, and many of you I know already do. We appreciate all of you out there that have those good listening habits very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. If you're looking for some tickets, maybe for a Cincinnati Bengals game, you can save $20 on your first purchase in the Gametime app with promo code LOCKEDONNFL. James, today we dive into the beginning of our training camp preview. And after we just spent an episode talking about Joe Burrow on quarterback on Netflix, now we're going to talk about Joe Burrow, the quarterback, and what we're looking for from Burrow in training camp, what our expectations are for his participation throughout the process, and how this period will be crucial potentially, and once again, trying to solve this slow start problem.
Yeah, it's the slow start thing is going to be a thing until it's no longer a thing. And so the Bengals certainly hope that they're going to be able to address it. Joe certainly feels, to me at least, from outside looking in, that he's still working through some kinks wrist-wise. But obviously that didn't get in the way last year when he threw for almost 5,000 yards and 43 touchdowns and broke multiple franchise records. And so for me, expectations are that he can find a way to hit the ground running, are that he can come in and play have the best September of his career. He's really, really good in December, and you got to get there and all of those things. But I think that it's realistic to think that Joe Burrow, given that he has Jamar and T back and signed and happy, Mike Gesicki back in the mix. But we've talked about Chase, but all these skill guys that we're going to highlight this week, there's no reason why Joe shouldn't be able to start out better, even with the questions in the offensive line room and some new coaches and all of those things. Joe should be maybe not his best self, because I do think that every quarterback uses September to tinker a little bit, and it takes a little bit of time to be playing your best ball. But he should be playing really darn well and hit the ground running here this season.
Yeah, if you can get a full season of December Joe Burrow, that's different from what we've seen from Joe Burrow throughout his career. And what we've seen from Joe Burrow throughout his career is already an incredible quarterback. But there's another level there that he gets to as the year goes on. We talked about that recently. And that, I think, is the idea, as we again discussed recently, have discussed throughout this offseason, that Joe's going to try to play a little bit more in this offense, and these starters on both sides of the ball are going to try to play a little bit more in the preseason. And we'll see how that matters. I think that is something that we'll obviously be scrutinizing closely when it gets to be time for those preseason games, and how that impacts Joe Burrow. If we see any evolution from preseason game 1 to preseason game 2, if that's even going to be possible to see with the way teams play in the preseason, and how simple things are kept in the preseason. But as far as training camp goes, we have this continuity. We always talk about continuity at this time of year. And last year we talked about continuity in a different way, but this year it is those skill guys, like you talked about, James. It's Jamar Chase, it's T. Higgins, it's Andre Yosevich, it's Mike Gesicki, it's Chase Brown. It's the return of Samaje Perine, the return of the beard and the continuity that came with Samaje Perine, and that being a guy that Joe Burrow trusts. And this year, that is where the notable continuity is on offense. Obviously, center, tackles, got continuity there as well. Overall on the offensive line, though, hard to say that that's a unit that feels like it's very stable year over year with the new offensive line coach, changes at guard. But what we talked about in terms of the chemistry that exists there, the experience that exists between Joe Burrow and his skill players, you like to see that playing up in training camp. And it's something that we talked about throughout the offseason program as well. But instead of the catching people up on things, which the players have talked about as well, and trying to acclimate guys to the system, it's the graduate level, postgraduate level, PhD level. Like, here are the little things that we can do on the margins to really get more out of this offense between Joe Burrow and the skill players. And I'm very interested to see how that plays out in training camp.
Well, it's the little things that Joe is going to notice. We talked a few days ago about quarterback and the conversation with Jamar that Joe had where he's recalling a route from LSU. And he's like, oh, you remember that route at LSU? The more you play with guys, when you're Joe, the more you remember, the more they remember. So can you imagine? He's like, oh, Mike, well, the route you ran last year against this team, do that, and then you add this to it. And maybe that's the difference in some of these tight games, some of these gotta have it moments, whether it's third down, whether it's fourth down, whether it's a 2-point conversion on the road. All of these things that we know decide games. And the Bengals went deep into the playoffs. It was 1 or 2 plays. And last year, it was 1 or 2 plays. They weren't all on offense, but some of them were. And I think people forget that. And Joe knows that for sure. And so I think that's where maybe he's going to just be more in rhythm with his guys, hopefully from the jump. And so it isn't pressure packed in November and December and early January, more so than seeding purposes, right? But I do think that when you invest the money they did in Jamar, T, Mike, all right, well, now how can Joe get more out of those guys or help this offense get to another level? I think it's there. I think they have another gear they can get to. And it isn't just as simple as, all right, well, the offensive line needs to play better. Huge part of it. But I do think that the Joe, there's some meat on the bone there. And I think he knows it, especially early on in the year. And for him to have a fully healthy offseason, and that's what he had, I think that goes a long way. Even though he's working through that wrist a little bit, he's been able to focus on little things, sharpening all the little tools. So when training camp rolls around next week, he's ready to go.
Yeah, I think it's different from years past. And how much does that familiarity and that drive to elevate from a quarterback and skill player perspective, how much does that help coaches with like details? We hear coaching staffs talk about details all the time. The familiarity with the system, the familiarity with each other, the cohesive understanding of what defenses are trying to do to them that has been developed over time. How much does that lead to the ability to elevate what you can do as an offense? Not necessarily, strictly speaking, more complex, but does that help them diversify further and add to the toolkit? I would think that it would. And we're, once again, I'm sure Jane's going to be talking about, are we going to see Joe Burrow under center again in training camp and going through all the play action under center stuff that we've seen that's been a point of emphasis seemingly for the last 2 years. And then you get to the season and you don't see it as much, especially when Eric All got hurt. And that really changed things last year. But we're going to see more of that. Are we going to see that sort of stuff again as Joe Burrow continues to get more comfortable in that setting? Or is it going to be a different approach? I think that is another thing that I'm interested in seeing where Joe is in terms of that part of his game.
Yeah. How are they built? Are they built for that? Not having Eric All matters. Like that's a factor. And last year down the stretch, when they were leaning on Chase Brown, it was a lot of gun stuff. And just because that they weren't great in short yardage, I wonder if that'll be part of it, but not a huge part of it. We'll see. Plenty more to discuss when it comes to Joe Burrow. When it comes to this offense, we'll continue the conversation coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. We've all been there, logging early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot because, well, there might be a glitch, or maybe you're waiting all day hoping to get picked and you don't get picked. Well, live music should be about making memories, not dealing with finding a way to get tickets. And that's where Gametime comes in. Whether it's concerts, whether it's your favorite games, whether maybe it's a Bengals preseason game, maybe you want to see Joe Burrow in action. Maybe it's not just a preseason game because there's only one at home this year. Maybe it's the regular season. Maybe you're thinking of Cincinnati Reds baseball. Anything and everything when it comes to tickets you can get with Gametime. I've used Gametime. It is awesome. It makes things easy. It makes life easy. You can see panoramic views from your seat. You have all-in pricing with Gametime as well, so there's no hidden fees that get you at checkout. And right now, you're going to get $20 off your first purchase by downloading the Gametime app, creating an account, using code LOCKEDONNFL. Again, all you have to do is create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON NFL, LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
So step one is continuity with skill players. And the question that we have around tight ends, we'll get to the skill players. That'll be its own episode where we're going to talk about the receivers and we're going to talk about the tight ends and the running backs. I do think that those will be fascinating conversations and seeing where the offense is, because the offense is built around Joe Burrow. And, Ben Baby pointed this out over on ESPN.com. Joe Burrow wants a running game. He talked about that in quarterback last week too. The ability to develop a running game would go a long way for Joe Burrow. So that's why I bring up the under center stuff and seeing where the offense goes in that sense. And the other thing that's always interesting is, what is Joe Burrow's mission for this year? Coming into camp healthy, a big difference from recent years. So where last year there was this big emphasis on how can he improve the dynamic athleticism of his game and be more of a threat with his legs and working on strengthening his lower body to break tackles and all those things, because he could, right? Like he was limited a little bit with his wrist, but his lower body wasn't limited at all. It's always interesting to see what is the thing that I'm going to focus on? What skill am I interested in refining the most in training camp? And do you have any ideas there, James? I mean, he plays this pretty close to the vest, obviously.
Yeah, I think the thing that he's always focused on is like at least the past couple of years, is the off platform, not set, the jump throws, all of those things, because he doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. And I think he's as accurate as they come when he's set, but it's those things. And he's gotten much better at it, I think, over the past year or two. And so that's the thing I notice, but he'll go into his bigger, faster, stronger, all of those things that he tries to focus on. But I think that's it. I think when someone's bearing down on you and you can't step into a throw, can you still get it and rip it where you want to get it to? And that's something I've seen him focus on for sure. And I do think it's been a focus this offseason as well.
Yeah, it's a thing that kind of always has been visible in training camp practices and certainly has been notable in offseason practices. This year was notable in training camp practices last year.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think the most important thing for Joe Burrow to accomplish in this training camp is going to be?
Well, it's twofold. One, it's always going to be health, especially coming into training camp. You just want him feeling great. How many seasons has he felt great going into them? His rookie year, and then I think
that was a weird year.
It was a super weird year. But that's
probably
it.
Felt pretty good at the beginning of the training camp before he got appendicitis that year, and then he had appendicitis.
I heard he felt great, but then he had the appendicitis, and his appendix burst and everything. He weighed $150, not really that low, but I mean he lost a lot of weight. So that would be one, health. Just being Joe, week one would be it. But then two, however he reads defenses, obviously he sees it as well as anyone and probably the best in football when he's there. and in it and locked in. Not that he hasn't been locked in at the beginning of the year, but you can see the difference late in the season versus early. How does he get there? Is it preseason reps? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, preseason reps are vanilla defenses, and like, so I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be, but whatever it is, figure out the routine. So when week 1 rolls around, you're seeing it enough and you're trusting it enough to let it rip when you need to. So when it's 7-3 in the second quarter against Cleveland and it's 3rd and 3, and you can either go up 14-3 and just completely put a bad Browns team in a bad spot. You don't hold the ball, get sacked, crowd goes wild. It's those type of moments. However he can get himself ready for that, do it. And it's not just on him. Obviously, their early season struggles, but I'm sure he looks back at a lot of these week ones and is like, oh, I should have been better, especially last year against a Patriots team that was just awful. And the Bengals knew they were awful. There was no one in the building after that game, Jake, that was like, oh, well, yeah, the Patriots are going to sneak up on teams. No, they were like, I can't believe we lost that game.
Yeah. Can't repeat that little bit of history, recent history. And here's my argument for why, and I'm sure I've said stuff like this before, why the preseason could help Joe Burrow, even if it is vanilla defenses, because even if you're getting very basic coverages and very basic defensive line play in terms of stunts and games and basic blitzes, if you get any blitzes, and I wonder how much dialogue there will be between Zach Taylor and opposing head coaches in the preseason. Probably not much. That's more of a joint practice thing. But Burrow has seen pretty much everything defenses can throw at him at this point. He's been in the league long enough. Teams are doing different stuff to him every week. He's having to diagnose on the fly every week. So as much as it's getting a feel for what opposing defenses are trying to do for him, I think it's also just speed. Just living through the speed of a live play with guys that are really going to come and hit him, and finding the timing for like, okay, yeah, it's cover 2. I know what to do against cover 2, but let me feel that speed and just getting used to that. So even if it is basic, that to me is the upside. Obviously, you got to keep him healthy. You got to limit hits. You got to coach smart. You got to block well, all those things. But just getting that exposure to, okay, it's cover 1. Here's me reacting to cover 1. Just getting those reps under his belt, even if it is basic, that's appealing to me, given what we know about how Joe Burrow kind of processes and gets better over time in a season.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because there's no joint practice. There's no practice. Doesn't matter what happened. You better not touch the merchandise. You better not get the Joe Burrow and even touch him, let alone hit him.
Of course, he wants to be hit, James.
A little bit, right? Like,
yeah.
To your point, the speed is the way to put it. Like, I don't think he wants to be hit ever, but knowing that they aren't going to hold up and slow down, and they are going to hit you, I think it's like, oh, we're playing football now, and that matters some. And by the way, players used to always play in the preseason. It used to always be a thing. Joint practices never used to be a thing, and so I get that. And if that's what it takes, and maybe it will, to turn Joe's supercomputer brain all the way on for the next season, then he'll be just fine. And we'll see. I think it is going to be nerve-wracking though, watching. It's going to be, because you just, it's meaningless football, but it'll mean a lot if he's ready to go with that JB9 processing system booted up and ready to go in Cleveland on September 7th.
Yeah, that's all you're really looking for to get to the regular season. Health and get him primed. That's the engine that's going to make the team go. We'll finish up the quarterback training camp preview. We're focused on Joe Burrow here. Let's be real. To finish this episode, coming up next.
Jake, I saw something last week. It might have been PFF, but it was something where Joe Burrow is projected to lead the NFL in passing yards again, lead the NFL in passing touchdowns again. Where's your expectations for him? Do you think he's just going to do that and set another franchise record, 5,000 plus, 45 touchdowns, and do that? Like, is that where you're at for him as a whole? Because even if he starts slow, we've seen him. He's going to put up numbers, set records last year. I sort of think that he'll have similar numbers, even if they drop a little bit. But what do you think?
I don't see a great reason not to think he's going to repeat that season.
That's a good way to put it.
I don't think that anything that he did last season is particularly unsustainable. The way that people were critical of the 9-8-9 season when all it was throwing go balls to Jamar Chase. Like people are like, they're not going to keep that up. Teams are going to take that away. And they take it away a little bit, but can they improve the offense as they iterate the offense? The big question is really the offensive line. But for Joe Burrow, I really don't see any reason to think he's slowing down at all. And the way that he plays and the strengths of his game don't necessarily expose themselves to significant risk that comes with just, precipitous cliff and just falling off it. Like that's just, it's not like if Joe loses a step, he's suddenly a terrible quarterback. That's not, I mean, he has athleticism, don't get me wrong, but that's not how he wins on a play-to-play basis. And all of the stable stuff for Joe Burrow, and PFF talks a lot about stable passing metrics, the clean pocket performance, all that decision-making when things are on schedule for Joe have been stable his entire time in the NFL and have been great the entire time he's been in the NFL. And then Jay Morrison, who did a great job covering this for Bengals Talk with you, James, talked about how good he's been. And I think Warren Sharp also talked about this. I think it was Warren Sharp. Or no, it was Brett Coleman. How his numbers when he's pressured are there's hardly a fall off. Joe Burrow under pressure's performance last year was great. That is less stable, but Joe generally has been as good as you could hope a quarterback could be under pressure, obviously, because he's under pressure so much and his numbers are still really good. So yeah, I don't see any real compelling argument to think there's a fall off coming unless the guards are just catastrophic, but they were already pretty much there last year.
Yeah, they were. And that's almost my fear though, is that like, that would be the thing, is everything he did is sustainable, but you can't take as many hits. You can't do it. Like we talked about it on last show. If by the way, if you just finished quarterback, check out our reaction to it from last week. But like, I don't want to hear Joe or wonder if Joe's neck, like he thought his neck was broken. And I know big hits happen, and it's the AFC North, and there's going to be a ton of pass rushers and all of that. But hopefully, like earlier in this show, you were like, well, the play action stuff. And I do wonder, like, is this offensive line now, like Dylan Fairchild, the one thing that you hope he can do is pass block. Lucas Patrick, and by the way, I think those are going to be the starting guards. Spoiler for when we talk offensive line. We'll see if it happens, but he's a quality pass blocker based on some advanced numbers. If you're going to pick a strength of his, you damn sure better be able to pass protect for Joe Burrow, because they're going to throw it all over the field. And that's what you need to do. And so in the past, we've talked about play action and all that. Can you drop back 40 times and keep 9 clean? That's it's a tall task. I know that, but that's the task that they're going to have. And if they can do that, then there's no reason why Joe can't be the league leader in really any statistical category when it comes to touchdowns, passing yards, anything like that. Completion percentage, he's capable of leading in all those categories.
If he is dropping back 40 times a game, you should probably lead in the counting stats. It's the rate stats that become more of a question. But if Joe Burrow is leading the league in passes, he should also lead the league in a bunch of categories because he's really good. And so if the really good, the best of the really good or if say you take the 4 really good quarterbacks, if they're all throwing the ball an equal amount of times, maybe it gets interesting. But if Joe's throwing 50 more passes than all those other guys, yeah, you would expect him to lead the league in those categories. I'm interested to see what the offense looks like more than anything and how they build it around Joe Burrow with all the continuity they have with the skill players and what Burrow's preferences are and how they've evolved for things like motion at the snap and, receiver alignment and the under center stuff. And I'm going to keep mentioning it, but it does dovetail into the skill player conversation and a bigger structural conversation around the offense in general. They were really good when they had Jamar Chase in motion last year. Jamar Chase was really good when he was in motion at the snap last year. He was really good in the slot last year. And this is more of a conversation that we'll get into when we get to the skill players. But Joe's comfort level with that stuff also matters a lot in terms of how much they're going to use it. And we know that going back to LSU, Burrow's preference, get 5 guys out in the pattern, a lot of times static pre-snap because he gets a lot of information that way as well. And so finding the optimal alignment of how much you're moving guys around, how much you're getting guys spread out, those questions will be really interesting to see if we can start to get some of those answers in training camp when we start to see them going into the team, the 11-on-11 move the ball drills, those sorts of things. What are the trends that we're seeing in terms of pre-snap and alignment? Those are always things that interest the maybe you call me a football nerd for it, but always things that interest me.
Sure. Absolutely. The motion, all of the things that maybe they can evolve and build on. The Chase Brown usage, like there's a bunch of things. And you know what the beauty is, Jake? The beauty of this conversation?
Tell me.
It's football.
Mm-hmm.
It's football time. We made it 5 days a week. And we're actually talking football now. All the drama, it does feel like ages ago when we were.
Well, it's coming back in the near future.
Yeah.
Because that is the other thing I was going to mention is distractions, but it's not really relevant on the offensive side of the ball.
No, and not really relevant to Joe Burrow,
Mm-hmm.
and it's part of the leadership element, that leadership quality.
Yeah.
Is I think he's good at keeping the blinders on and focusing on training camp, which should help because there probably are going to be a few distractions during camp.
Yeah. The leadership question, another one that's interesting is do we see any evolution in terms of on-field leadership, in the locker room leadership? Is that something that is visible to us or those in the media from the training camp perspective? Will be something that takes time and takes getting into the regular season. I think that'll be interesting as well. We didn't really talk about the backups here at all, James, just to wrap up the show here. Jake Browning will be the backup quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals in 2025, barring some unforeseen circumstance. Logan Woodside and Peyton Thorne will be with the team in the preseason. Logan Woodside is very likely destined for the practice squad, or maybe they'll do another surprise and they'll go find another practice squad quarterback. But we're not too far off, James, from talking about finding a new backup for Joe Burrow. Jake Browning under team control, I believe, for the final season in 2025.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that they'll be in the quarterback market at some point. And I don't think Logan Woodside's the long-term backup. I think Jake Browning is a really solid quality backup quarterback. He's valuable. And those are going to be the 2 quarterbacks, Joe Burrow and Jake Browning, 2 JBs. And then after that, it's Logan Woodside trying to prove that he deserves that practice squad spot. We'll see. We'll see if that works out. I think it will. From everything I hear about him, he works hard and knows the offense and all of those things. But I think they end up keeping 2 quarterbacks, and that's a heck of a tandem, honestly. Jake Browning has developed into a nice backup, and if you need him here or there, it's a lot better than a lot of these backup quarterback situations, or even starting situations in some instances.
The luxury there is that he's cost controlled, and whether or not the Bengals choose to extend Browning for going rate backup quarterback money, which is a whole lot more significant than the $1 million or so he's scheduled to make this year. Or if the Bengals choose to stay cheap there, that'll be interesting, because speaking of continuity, that's another bit that has been steady for Joe Burrow in terms of having the backup quarterback on the sideline with him and Jake Browning for 4 years now?
3
years?
Still, but your point is a valid one. Yeah, Brandon Allen exists. Don't forget about Brandon Allen.
I'm sorry, Brandon Allen. That's going to do it for this episode, previewing what we're hoping to see from Joe Burrow in this preseason and training camp process in 2025. We're going to keep on going. Training camp previews all week here on Locked On Bengals. Until next time, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.